All right, I see some familiar faces here today. Thanks for joining us, folks. Good to see you all here. I'm Roberta McIntyre with Fire Safe Sonoma, and this is our monthly speaker series where we try to get some exceptional guest speakers on through Fire Safe Sonoma and provide some hopefully really valuable content for folks interested in wildfire safety and risk reduction. So with that, oftentimes, So sometimes I will share this out because we are doing a live stream and this will be part of the evergreen content. Just so folks know, this is a monthly program that we do except for December. We're dark in December. And one of the things I do out of my own pocket is if we have a significant number of attendees, my threshold is around 25. If we have at least 20 to 25 attendees, I will give somebody a door prize. So what I do is after the meeting, I go through and look at all the internet addresses of the folks that attended, and then those go into an Excel spreadsheet. I do a random generator in Excel, and it picks one of those email addresses, and then I send them a door prize. We don't have enough people in today to do that, so share it. If next month, if we have enough people, then I will do the door prize. I had to figure out a way to make it economical for me and at the same time encourage people to, come and take a look at our program. So that's an incentive, hopefully. The month before last, I think it was, I had a door prize. I gave out, actually, Noelle. What's Noelle's last name?
Lab.
Thank you. Yeah, she's one of our volunteers. She actually, no bias, honestly, it was real. She won an emergency backup light. It's a flashlight thing you plug in your outlet, and when the power goes off, the flashlight comes on, and then you could take it out of the socket and you've got a handy flashlight for the power outage. Anyway, so again, sorry we don't have enough people to do that this time, but yeah. When we do, what I have in the queue that I want to give as a door prize, maybe next month, is a book called Fire Bomber into Hell. It's a story of survival in a deadly occupation. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining. Just a recap, last month we had Carly-Ann Safford, and she was here talking about the Sonoma County, updated Sonoma County CWPP and the Permit Sonoma's project porthole that's married to the county community wildfire protection plan. And then next month, we're going to have Daria Said from the California Department of Insurance on the program. She's going to talk about what the California Insurance Commissioner's Office is doing about the topic of fire insurance, or wildland fire insurance, I should say. And I got a feeling that's going to be one where we're going to get some really good attendance. Again, also remember all of these programs are being recorded and streaming live. So if you miss one, you can go on our YouTube channel and check it out, regardless of whether you show up here the third Thursday of every month at 2 o'clock. All right, with all that said, this month we have Merlin Schlumberger, I hope I pronounced that right, Merlin, of the Merlin Arborist Group on the program. He's going to talk about all they do with his company, and he's also going to give helpful landscaping tips from the point of view of an arborist. And we use arborists for vegetation treatment plans and field treatments when we go into in-depth project development. And yeah, being an arborist means more than knowing how to limb up an oak tree just a little bit. When I spoke with Merlin, when I first met him, we were in Oakmont at a safety fair. I was tabling and he was tabling, and I stopped to visit him, I'm like, what does the arborist do? Can you tell if a tree's healthy or not? He's like, yeah, you can look at a tree. It's more than that. He says, if you look at a tree, it might look healthy, but not be healthy. And you might look at a tree and it might not look healthy, but actually be healthy. I'm like, you got to get on our program here and explain what arborists do, because there's a lot to it. So the Merlin Arborist Group is fully licensed and insured tree care and consulting company there in Sonoma County. Their family-run business works with commercial, residential, municipal, and agricultural clients to provide the highest level of tree care. And Merlin's he's an International Society of Arboriculture board certified master arborist, not an apprentice or journeyman, and an ISA, International Society of Arboriculture, qualified tree risk assessor, and a registered consulting arborist through the American Society of Consulting Arborists. He's also adjunct faculty at Santa Rosa Junior College and teaches arboriculture, as well as tree biology, raptor re-nesting, pruning, and grafting classes to industry professionals. And he volunteers as a climber for the Bird Rescue Center to re-nest raptors after they've been rehabilitated. That's awesome, Merlin. I didn't know you did that. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Studies, Archaeology, and Sociology from UC Santa Cruz. So with that, amazing individual. I can't wait to see the presentation. Folks, if you have questions, just put them in the chat as we go, and then as you think of them, and then we'll get to them at the end. We'll respond to all the questions in a Q&A following this presentation. So as you all know, I can talk and talk and talk, so I'm gonna stop now and hand it over to you, Merlin.
Alrighty, well, thanks for the great intro. I will start my slides if I can. Let's see. Here we go. Yeah, thanks again for the great intro. You make me look better than I do. And here is our slides. If you have any questions, I think we'll take questions at the end, and I can talk about trees for just about ever. And fire is a pretty big aspect of that. So let's get rolling. This is me, but I was even better presented, so I don't need to linger on this page too long, but this is right before we re-nested this baby great horned owl, and my daughter was helping way up in a big beautiful valley oak tree. The poor thing had fallen out and put it right back in its nest. Trees and tree related things is pretty much most of what I've done in my adult life. I'm fairly incompetent when it comes to many other things, but when it comes to trees, that's what I've done. I can climb them, talk about them, teach about them, and continue to learn more. Fires are very closely linked to trees, as we'll see. And this is our company. We do all sorts of tree related things. We do both the consulting side, where we can give advice, and we do the actual tree work side. And there's many different aspects of it all. And actually this picture here, we are in the process of installing a rope swing. So there's all sorts of different aspects of tree work. Yeah, we're fully licensed, insured, have all of the bells and whistles, and we have a great, very highly qualified crew. We're a very small outfit. There's just one crew out there. Okay. And here is our presentation. We're going to start by talking about kind of introducing fire, because it's helpful to have a better understanding of fire in order to figure out how fire works. Of course, I'm not a fire scientist, but I'm quite interested in that. So I'll try to give my course understanding of fire and how fire works, and then talk about which trees may be more prone to burning and which trees may be less prone to burning, and what we can kind of look for in different features of these different trees. And then essentially we'll talk about what we can do with that knowledge, how we can use trees and to a lesser extent other plants for some level of fire defense in tree work. And yeah, kind of understanding how trees and fuels work and how we can use that knowledge to reduce the risk that trees pose. Okay, we'll jump right into it. What is fire? Fire is a chemical reaction where fuel mixes up with oxygen and it gives off light, heat, and flame. What's really important to understand, and this is how firefighters figure out a way to slow and stop fires, is we need all three of these items in the triangle to have a fire. We need oxygen, we need heat, and we need fuel. If we have just one of these missing, the fire will go out. And this is how firefighters fight fire. If you pour water on a fire, you're cooling it down because the water turns into vapor that's not flammable. You're lowering the temperature of the fire to the point that the fire goes out. So you're tackling the heat part of the triangle. If you're throwing dirt on top of the fire, you're suffocating it. You're starving it of oxygen, and that keeps the fire, and that stops the fire also. And if you deprive the fire of fuel, it also burns out and there's nothing left. So you need all three of these in order to have a fire. A lot of folks are like, but wait, isn't there fires in the Arctic? Like, can't you have fires in a cold area? Of course you can, but you need heat for that fire to start. And then the fire generates heat and can start burning other things. So when you strike a match, that initial friction makes that spark. That's the heat that starts the initial fire. What's kind of interesting to think about in the context of a wood burning is we think of wood being flammable. Wood is this dry thing that we use in our wood burning stove to keep us warm or to cook marshmallows and hot dogs on. But really, it's a little more complicated than that. When you add a lot of heat to wood, that wood starts transforming, breaking down and transforming into smoke and into some 300 different chemicals that those are the ones that burn. So it's the gas that burns. It's not the solid wood that burns. First, the wood needs to be heated to start expelling these flammable chemicals, and those are the ones that burn. When you look at a candle, there is no visible smoke coming off a candle, but the moment you blow it out, that's when you see the smoke. That smoke is what's flammable. On the picture we have on the right here, this is a top burn pile. It's a way to essentially burn fuel with producing very little smoke. This is maybe 10-foot tall flames. You can see a tiny bit of smoke coming off, but very much like a candle, if the fire is at the top of the burn pile, the heat transforms the brush underneath the fire into those 300 different chemicals, and then they go through the heat and ignite, and what's left is CO2 and water vapor, and there is no smoke. So fire is not necessarily smoky because smoke is flammable. Essentially, if a fire is smoky, it's not fully ignited. It's not a clean burn. Another interesting thing to think about in fire is how fire is a little bit like reverse photosynthesis. And I usually talk about photosynthesis, more rarely about fire, but photosynthesis is essentially the plant absorbs CO2 out of the atmosphere, uses water from the soil, and with sunlight makes plant material that's a carbon based and expels oxygen. Fire is the rapid reversal of that, where it consumes oxygen and expels back CO2 and releases that heat and energy that it was absorbed during photosynthesis, and it can release it very rapidly. So many years of absorbing the sun can be released in heat and light very rapidly. Okay, so here's the quick intro of fire. I'd like to talk about how there's realistically very different kinds of wildfires that affect us. So here's a picture on the left of the Tubbs fire. That was a wind-driven fire. Wind-driven fires are very rapid. They supply a lot of oxygen. When you think of that fire triangle, there's a lot of oxygen, so it makes the fire burn faster. It can also carry embers and start a whole bunch of fires downwind from where people may be trying to slow down the fire. Wind-driven fires are realistically the most challenging for us to deal with. The best way to prevent a wind-driven fire is really to not have that initial spark. We don't want a wind-driven fire. We may not be able to stop it very easily. This fire even went into Coffee Park. If you look at CAL FIRE's wildfire risk map, Coffee Park is not even a zero risk area. It's not even considered a risk of wildfire. At least it wasn't before 2017, because there's no wild next to it. There's no forest next to it. It's separated by a 4-lane freeway. In this case, the wind was just blowing all these embers and using the homes as fuel. The fuel was no longer dry wood or forest. It was actual homes. So on the picture on the left, you can see the fire started here out of Calistoga in 943, and about 5 hours later, it had moved 10 miles over very rugged terrain, very hard to get out of the way in that time, and in mostly a straight downwind line. But fires move uphill and downwind, so it did also go up towards Mount St. Helena, but much slower because that was not the direction of the wind. Now, if we compare it to a different fire, the Walbridge fire that was started by all sorts of lightning, that fire was a fuel-driven fire, the other type of fire that isn't necessarily pushed by heavy wind. It's just ignited for whatever reason. In this case, it was lightning, and then the fire starts and burns. So that burned into Armstrong Woods. You can see the orange spots are where the initial fire started, and the red spots are the latest part of it. So rather than the wind-driven fire that took 5 hours to move 10 miles, this took 26 hours to move 5 miles. So much slower going. It's also very steep, rugged terrain, so the slopes really help the fire crews uphill. So it's helpful to really understand there's two different types of fires, and the fuel-driven fires is going to be the one we spend more energy on as arborists, as people who manage vegetation, because that's the ones that we may be able to do something about. The wind-driven fire, if a concrete building surrounded by an asphalt parking lot burns down, there's not a lot of fuel management that could have changed that. So fuel-driven fires, we'll talk about those more, and we can also talk about wind-driven fires somewhat, but they'll have different solutions. So for fuel-driven fires, we need fuel, and fuels are not created equal. Ground dry fuel is absolutely the single most important driver of wildfires. A colleague who's actually has a doctorate in fire ecology could not emphasize this enough. She really insisted ground fuels are the driver of wildfire. There's nothing else that matters near as much as ground fuels. So that's the stuff that's on the ground. Now, it's all pretty different. There's little things on the ground. There's dry grasses on the ground. There's also green grasses on the ground, depending on the season. When you have a tree that sheds its needles or its leaves or its branches, that lands on the ground. That carbon on the ground will, one of two things will happen to those leaves, those sticks that land on the ground. one of which is it can rot. And that's slowly with the help of fungi that just breaks it down and turns it into CO2. So most of it goes back into the atmosphere, and to some extent turns it into some essentially compost, some soil organic matter that can benefit the plants. But if it doesn't rot, it just sits there and dries and waits for the fire to burn it down, which also releases into CO2 and possibly also soil organic matter. So the end result on the geological scale may not be that different, but as we know, the process is quite different. So that dead plant material in your on the ground in your landscape and in your woods, it's really either going to rot or it's going to burn. That's the only two options. Now, how can we tell if it's going to rot or burn? Well, if it's moist, it's probably going to have a harder time burning. And I guess a way to think about that is to think about that it's not the solid fuel itself that burns, it's when it's transformed into a gas. So if you have high moisture fuel and you apply a lot of heat to it, the first thing that's going to happen is that the moisture in the fuel is going to evaporate, turn into water vapor. A lot of that heat is going to be wasted, if you can say, from the fire's perspective, to evaporate water. And maybe that's it. Maybe there's only so much heat and water vapor came out. Now the leaves are all shriveled, but the solid fuel did not ignite. If the fuel is really dry, there is no water vapor, and the flammable chemicals are the first to vaporize, and then they ignite, create their own heat, and run. The other factor is going to be fuel size. So that's where that chart is pretty helpful, where a tiny little twig is going to be easier to ignite than a big log. That's fairly intuitive for anybody that's ever struck a match. A match is a tiny dry twig. It burns easily. So dry grass is very flammable. The way that firefighters like to rate these is by the type of hour fuel. In the 1 hour fuel, essentially, if it's dry for an hour, that fuel dries out. And then if it becomes humid for an hour, that fuel gains moisture again, and it's going to be less flammable. The 1,000-hour fuel, that's going to be the big logs. Those take an entire season to absorb moisture and release the moisture again. And obviously there's everything in between, and there's going to be the quantity of fuel also. But with those two things together, fuel moisture and fuel size, you can have a pretty good estimate of how your land may or may not burn. In the winter, if you have a pile of dead sticks on the ground, those could still burn in the winter. And if it's a large pile of small, dead, dryish sticks, that could be a pretty big, bad fire. But if you're in an oak woodland in the winter and there's a whole bunch of grasses, those are green. Those are so high in moisture, there is nothing that will burn green grass. 6 months later, that grass is flammable. That can make a very fast fire. Okay, so that was fuel. So now we can actually start talking about trees, which is maybe why many of you guys are here. How can we tell if our tree is more flammable, if our tree is more likely to burn up? Trees with oily leaves, again, think about that water vapor. If there's some flammable chemical in the leaf that with heat releases and can ignite, even if there's water present, sometimes these oils are going to ignite before the water vapor comes out. So oily leaf trees are more flammable, such as a bay tree is high in oils than a high water content leaf. Generally speaking, it's hard, it's expensive for a tree to make these oils. So deciduous trees that get rid of their leaves every year, those are going to have higher water content. The evergreen trees are typically going to have higher oil contents and are going to be more flammable. If there's a pile of dead and dry leaves and twigs, that's more flammable. My Two examples of that are maybe the Italian cypress, where that's the tall, I don't know if I have a picture, I may not, but oh yeah, there's a picture out there on the right of an Italian cypress. It's the tall tower looking tree that every dead twig that ever came out of this tree is still in the tree. And if an ember lands in this tree, it's going to land in a nice tidy nest of kindling, and it's going to light on fire, and fire going uphill easily. There's a lot more kindling uphill. These become Roman candles. They are extremely flammable. If you have one right next to your house, it could be a good thing to remove, and you may reduce your the risk to your house. Another example that I've heard from a firefighter colleague in Southern California is palm trees, and especially the palm trees with a lot of palm fronds, the dead palm leaves at the bottom. Those are quite flammable, and he had a very apocalyptic description off of Santa Barbara, seeing a whole grove of palm trees on fire. The palm fronds would break off on fire, fly several hundred yards ahead, and start fires elsewhere. And he insisted that wasn't the worst. The worst was that there's a lot of rats that live in these palm fronds, and the rats would jump out of the tree in flame, run around, and start the bushes on fire because they're flaming rats. So if you have a palm tree without any palm fronds, that's fine. These palm trees are actually quite tolerant of fire, and they're not very flammable, but the dry palm fronds are. Lots of litter, it's going to be more flammable. Fine needles, such as conifers, are going to be more flammable. Shaggy or peeling bark, such as the blue gum eucalyptus, that's actually a fire-resistant adaptation of the eucalyptus, where the bark essentially catches on fire intentionally to make a fast fire that goes into the canopy and does not stay hot for long and protects the tree itself. So encouraging fire can often reduce fire damage, and that applies to the landscape, and that applies to many trees that have figured out a way to use those techniques. So here's some characteristics of the flammable trees. Again, if you have any questions, I'm always happy to talk more. And here are characteristics of less flammable trees. So higher moisture content. Now that could just be deciduous trees. An apple tree leaf is high in water. You can really set a blowtorch in front of an apple tree leaf. If you set it to the apple, well, the apple's going to cook, but it's not going to ignite. It's very difficult to light an apple on fire, and an apple tree with green leaves, also very difficult. One of the things I like to do is recommend just imagining your landscape and standing there with a blowtorch and just pointing the blowtorch at your plants. Will it light on fire? Well, you might not know, but you might have a decent idea. If you're pointing your blowtorch at a spot of well-irrigated lawn, after a while, you're going to get tired of it, and there's going to be a dead patch of grass, but it's never going to light. Same with a grapevine, or an apple tree. A lot of our deciduous oaks are going to be similar, where those leaves just will not light on fire. Our California buckeye has also a great adaptation where it's actually going to drop its leaves before fire season even starts. So it's just well hydrated twigs. There's no way to light a California buckeye on fire. But in the event of a ground fire, they have thin bark, and the ground fire may kill the tree. It's just not gonna push the tree further. It's not gonna threaten your house if you have one near your house. Getting rid of litter, the ground fuel, again, if you don't have dry ground fuel, you have a lot less risk of a fire running. If you have a well-hydrated landscape, then the plants, even more flammable plants, will have higher moisture content and are going to be less likely to ignite. Let's see here. So here are the two different priorities for when we try to imagine there may be a fire coming in. What can we do ahead of time to reduce the damage of the fire? Well, there's two different priorities. Do we want to reduce the damage to the right, or do we want to reduce the damage to the left? The picture on the left, actually both these pictures are taken a few hundred yards from each other. It was a Tubbs fire, extraordinarily destructive wind-driven fire that wrecked many, many homes and also really wrecked woodlands and ecosystem, really transformed them. So when we do fuels reduction work, when we do work to try to protect from fire damage, we need to figure out what is our priority. Is our priority to protect your home, or is our priority to protect the woodland? And it's a very important distinction, because if you do a lot of work to protect the woodland, you may actually encourage a ground fire that moves fast, that's a fairly cool fire that burns the low fuel, that doesn't catch the canopy, that recycles a lot of the nutrients, and is generally considered just ecologically beneficial. It may prevent bad fires in the future. These are kind of the goals of prescribed fires, but that fast moving ground fire may also just burn your house down. And conversely, if all you do is protect your home, well, you may have a woodland that has a crown fire that's completely torched and a completely changed and damaged ecosystem, but your house is still standing. So those are just different priorities and different ways to address vegetation for these different priorities. So what, essentially the question is, what can we do? One of the things we can do is obviously choose, when we choose to plant trees in a landscape environment, we can stay away from the junipers and the Italian cypresses and the really oily flammable stuff, and plant varieties that are either less or barely flammable at all. And that's a fairly easy solution. On the slide on the right, we've got all sorts of flammable stuff and a propane tank. On the slide on the slide on the left, and on the right, we've got a well-hydrated willow tree and a lawn. It's just not gonna burn. It might get damaged from heat, but it's not gonna burn. It's not gonna carry the fire. So that's in a landscape environment. We can actually sometimes pick and choose the species that there are. If you have an established landscape, well, you can remove the more flammable trees and you can plant less flammable trees. In a more woodland natural environment, we can also put our thumb on the scale by removing more flammable trees and encouraging the less flammable ones. So in a woodland ecosystem, that could mean removing Douglas fir and bay trees that may be encroaching on an oak woodland. Oaks, generally speaking, are a much less flammable than Douglas fir and bay. And as fire prevention efforts have happened in the last century or so, the Douglas fir and the bay have grown in the shade in the nursery environment of the oak woodland, have benefited from the environment underneath the oak canopy, and then crested through the oak canopy, shaded the oak trees out. Now the oak trees die because they don't have enough sunlight. And then all these Douglas fir that are way taller, and too many of them may run out of water. They may also struggle and die. And you have a huge amount of flammable fuel. So possibly removing these Douglas fir and bay trees that would have been removed with a fire regime could help in a woodland environment, could help in the event of a fire. Okay. So you guys may have heard about fire ladders. So that's another way to think about it, to look at how a fire behaves, because fires tend to go uphill and downwind, because heat rises. They're cooking the stuff up above them, blowing them into all these flammable chemicals, and then they catch, and it keeps going up. So in order to try to reduce the event of a crown fire, which crown fires are generally bad news and devastating, they carry much taller flames. we can try to separate the ground fuel from the canopies, so that a ground fire does not ignite the upper canopies. So there's a little image of a fire ladder. This is not a hard and fast rule, but it's a good kind of guideline where if you have fuel, if you have grass or dry brush, you kind of look at the height of the fuel and you multiply it by 2.5. That's going to be the height of the flame. Do you have any flammable branches? 2.5 times the height of your ground fuel. If you do, your options are, well, maybe remove those branches up high or remove the fuel down low, or a combination. That's not hard and fast rule, of course. A lot of factors apply, such as, heavy wind environment. The flames are going to be much higher. The fuel type, if it's a big log or if it's a pile of kindling, and the fuel moisture of it obviously is also going to have an impact on that. But it's a good guideline. So, low grasses, you don't really have, if you have low grasses that you weed whack really low, you don't really have to have a 10-foot high clearance. That 4-inch grass is not going to light something 10 feet up. So you can have a lower canopy, but if you have some chamise or some flammable shrubs underneath your trees that you want to keep, you may want to remove those low branches. Here's on the left, we have a fuel ladder intact where the ground fire catches into the canopy, causes a crown fire. And on the right, the ground fire does not catch the crown fire and becomes what we consider a more healthy fire that doesn't damage the canopy. It could still kill the trees and it could still burn your house down, but it's much less likely to cause really devastating ecosystem damages. So it's not just ladder fuels that we want to address. We also want to reduce stem density, where historically, when in our coastal woodlands that were regularly burned, we probably had 30 to 60 trees per acre. Now we maybe have several hundred. Our forests are way too dense, and with so much fuel, a tree may easily catch the neighbor tree. So here's a picture before and after a treatment where we have fewer trees, less fuel to burn. These trees are shading the ground. Keeping the ground shade may make a ground fire less hot and devastating. So here's a kind of illustration of both fire ladder reduction and increasing the distance between trees, creating fire breaks that can improve resiliency. So a lot of that was tackling kind of more woodland areas that may or may not help your home. When we talk about home protection, we're really looking at what's within 30 feet of your house. It's beyond 30 feet. There's not a whole lot you can do that may protect your home. If there's a wind-driven fire, well, those embers might be flying miles and igniting stuff from really far away. In a fuel-driven fire, that's where the 30 feet really matters. Really look at the surface fuels within 30 feet. The closer you are to the house, the more important. So rake up any dry stuff. Try to see if you can have well-hydrated fuels within 30 feet. Any dead, dry branches, try to keep those out. Really try to have a good fire ladder, maybe space in between the canopies. Certainly, I don't advocate for removing all trees within 30 feet, because then maybe your soil might really overheat, and any kind of ground fuel might be much more prone to driving a fire. Trees on the west side of your house may shade your house and make it less flammable, because homes are made out of dry wood. They're quite flammable. But really look into what's close to your house. That's going to be the biggest impact as far as what you can do from a fuel management perspective to protect your house in the event of a fire. What's beyond that is going to be much more, beyond 30 feet, it's going to be much more what can I do to protect the landscape. Here's some common surface fuels. We all have some of those around our houses. One thing that that's interesting to think about. Some of us heat our homes with fire. So on the top left here, we've got a stack of wood. Those of you who heat with fire, you have an idea what a cord of wood is. It's 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet. And it's kind of nice to have it near your house. So when you need to heat up your house, you just go outside, pick up a couple logs, put them in the stove. But a cord of wood has as much energy as 160 gallons of gasoline. In the event of a fire, would we want to store 160 gallons of gas right next to our house? Probably not. Keeping that wood further away from the house where that firepower of 160 gallons of gas could burn and not ignite the home, that would be beneficial. So think about where you keep your flammables, and right against the house is not the spot. But trees, they're not necessarily the villain. I mean, some of them are. The Italian cypress is one that I'm just not a huge fan of from a fire perspective. But a lot of times trees can actually protect your home. They can block heat in the event of a wind-driven fire. I had a client in Kenwood who had an oleander hedge directly downwind from the fire. Oleander is oily, is flammable, but she attributes this hedge for saving her home. Her home is the only home in the large area around that did not burn down. And it had this really thick hedge that she thinks caught all the embers that were coming in. And sure, the hedge eventually burnt, but it was far enough away from her house so that the burning hedge was radiating heat, had flames, but wasn't throwing embers anymore. And the first assault of embers were blocked by the hedge. Her home survived. So slowing the wind, intercepting embers can really help. Blocking heat so that the house doesn't burn down. And having a canopy to cool the ground could really help make a ground fire much less damaging. Okay, well, now we're going to talk about just different aspects of trees and what we can do in the case of fire. How about dead trees? People think, oh, it's a snag, it's a dead tree, it's got to go. Well, dead trees aren't all created equal. The tree to the left here that's charred, there is no amount of forest fire that's going to make this tree a high-risk tree. It's 1,000-hour fuel. There's only a tiny little bit that interacts with the ground. If somebody were to fell it and drop it on the ground, well, now there's more ground fuel. So it'd be worse to put it on the ground. And as it is standing, birds will perch on it. That tree, really, I don't see that tree as posing any risk of wildfire. Well, the fire already went through, but any further risk of wildfire. It can actually provide some dappled shade to new trees that are growing. The trees on the right, that's much more recent after a fire. There's a lot of kindling there. These may be much more flammable, and you may want to tend to those. Another example could be sudden oak death, where a tree that just died of sudden oak death is covered in dead leaves. Those are flammable. But if you go a few years or a decade with no fire, all those leaves are going to fall, all the small twigs are going to drop, and now the dead standing tree may be less of a fire hazard. So don't think that removing all dead trees is a good idea. Just think of removing the really flammable ones, keeping some dead trees for shade, but trying to look at the fire ladders and the gap between canopies to protect them. How about wood chips? Well, the fire people, the people who know a whole lot more about fire than I do, they don't like wood chips because wood chips, they don't burn fast, but they burn slow and hot. So they may cook the roots of trees. They may keep a fire going for a really long time, even if they're not going to carry a fire very rapidly. This is a big fire break effort in the Sierras. Both of these pictures are taken quite close to each other, where they spread wood chip, chipped a lot of trees. The mountain of wood chips on the right is bigger than my house. It's an enormous mountain of wood chips. If that ignited, it's going to burn hot and really just it's going to cook everything for a ways. The thinly layered wood chips, those may burn less hot, less long, turn into charcoal and be better. Now, wood chips are going to be better than dry fuel. If you have a pile of dry fuel, chipping it may be the better alternative. if you look at your woodland or the area around your house, and you're like, I know what I need to do. I need to remove these flammable trees, increase fire ladder, but then I'm stuck with a pile of brush. If I just cut it, it used to be hydrated, less flammable. I just cut it. Now it's drying and it's more flammable. It's a problem to just cut it and pile it there. What can you do about it? You could chip it. The fire, really, the fire people would rather you did burn piles and burnt it, but that's not easy with air in Sonoma County with air regulations. If you do chip it, well, that's expensive, although not necessarily. Sonoma County has free chipping programs, so you can look up the free chipping program in Sonoma County. There are some quotas where it has to be close enough to the road, and chips are better than brush, even if they're not ideal. Chips are not ideal, but still pretty good. Okay, here we can talk about slopes. Fires moves uphill, so slopes are problematic. If your house is on top of the hill and you've got a lot of brush below you, you may really want to extend that 30 feet lower. But a lot of that fuels reduction work may cause erosion, and you don't want to cause erosion. So we've got competing priorities when we have steep slopes, where we want to reduce erosion and also reduce fire risk, where one of the jobs may make the other one terrible. Oftentimes people who fell a tree like to lay the log on contour because that's going to slow the water. Fire people really despise that, because if that log catches on fire and it's on contour, it's going to roll down the hill, start a fire at the bottom of the hill, and make a fast fire uphill. So be careful how you stack your logs on the hill. Okay, try to run through these. There's a few things that arborists can do. We can reduce fuel loads, we can create fire breaks, reduce fire ladders, we can kind of help with plant ID, what makes more sense to tackle first. We can also come after a fire and do cleanup, and we can also look at access roads and emergency access to look at what may make the most sense to prioritize before a fire. And clearing access roads can be really one of the few things we can do for a wind-driven fire. Now there's a lot of things that we cannot do as arborists. One of the most important is home hardening. Many of the homes that have seen survive wildfires are homes that are built to modern fire standard, regardless of the vegetation around them. Most often, I tell folks that spending $1 in a carpentry solution is $1 better spent than in a vegetative management solution. Prescribed burning can be really helpful in reducing fire risk. Again, our whole crew is certified as wildland firefighter too, so we can help, but we cannot conduct those. Grazing can really help because the animals can chew the low branches and the grasses and create that fire ladder break without a lot of cost. We can't guarantee the lack of fire risk or the lack of tree risk in general. One of the things I really recommend you guys do is call your local fire department when it's not peak fire season. I live in Gold Ridge Fire District. They come every year, give us advice. They come for free. They like it. They know the access. They always give us good advice. And I feel like I know a lot of good things, and every time they still give great advice. They are the people who will show up in the event of the fire. So they really know what's gonna help a fire spread.
Merlin, we just want to do a quick time check with you. We have 9 minutes until 3 o'clock.
Okay. Well,
some questions in the chat.
Yeah, ready for a chat. There's a couple pictures I'm happy to talk about, but actually we're at a good stopping point. So I'll just cruise through these. Dry brush is flammable. Maybe take it out. The green brush less so. Fires can completely change ecosystems. But let's just go to questions if you guys have them.
Awesome.
Thank you, Merlin.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks. That was actually winding up pretty good. So we do have a couple of questions so far, and then I have a couple questions / comments as well. So before I dive into the attendee questions,
like me to share my hear you.
Thanks. I do want to talk a little bit about your fire science piece. I will share with you, you'll love this, Merlin. When I taught at the junior college, I did a block on fire science, fire chemistry. And one of the things that I love that you expressed that the solid material is not in fact what's burning. The heat takes that solid material and vaporizes it to its vapor point. And the flame you actually see is the vapor coming off of that solid mass that's burning.
Long time to understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I used to demonstrate that in the classroom. I would take a candle, light it, and then I'd take a piece of glass tube, like you use for chemistry, hold it with a pair of tongs, and I would put it over the candle, and then I was able to light the end of the gas tube
Oh,
because
cool.
I'm pulling the gases off of that and lighting them over here. It was a pretty cool way of showing folks that what you're seeing burning is actually vapor. It's not a solid material. So I thought the fact that you explained that in your fire behavior piece was really good. So I appreciate that. And then I also want to comment about your analogy or your comparison between, fire being, fire itself is the rapid oxidation with the evolution of, heat and light, and how photosynthesis is the opposite of that. But my question to you is, if photosynthesis is the opposite of that, how come it doesn't get dark when that happens? Why isn't there evolution of dark? I'm kidding, of course.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right? Because fire is the evolution of heat and light. Why isn't photosynthesis the evolution of cold?
Source the light. I guess maybe the shade under the tree is the dark.
Perhaps. I don't know enough about that science to
Yeah, that's a
even-
good question.
other than make a little bit of a joke of it.
Yeah.
So jump into questions, and then folks, if you still have questions, please put them in the chat, or we have a few enough number here. We can just open it up for a free-for-all dialogue and discussion. So Lynn asked,
Questions about Mediterranean oak borer and sudden oak death.
yeah, can you handle that?
Yeah, we don't have a whole lot of time. Mediterranean oak borer seems unrelated to fire, but it's a terrible new pest that we have that's impacting our valley oak trees. To a lesser extent, likely our Gary oaks, the Oregon white oak, does not impact the coast live oak or the black oak. It's a new pathogen. We don't really know how to deal with it. We know that it's a bad idea to move the wood because we're moving the beetle, and we don't yet have a place to move it to, because if you have a big dead tree in your yard, it needs to go, the best solution is to pile it up and cover it with a tarp. A clear tarp, so that the bugs die under the tarp and not move it. That's not always an option, but it is the best option. We don't want to move these bugs. Sudden oak death. There used to be a better way to send sudden oak death bay leaves to get them tested, and now there's the sudden oak death blitz. Look up sudden oak death blitz, and that's the better way to figure out sudden oak death. And there's also tools online to figure out where the closer sudden oak death things are. Tan oaks are really affected by sudden oak death, and in the short term, they can make the fire risk a lot worse. In the long term, they may make it better because they may create breaks in the canopy. It's kind of in the air.
Yeah, well, gosh, you guys, we are just about out of time. Thank you guys for showing up. You guys are like our regulars, I think. Appreciate it. Thank you, Marika, for helping us out today. And Mason in particular, thank you for all your help with all these programs. Actually, this might be Mason's last program that he's helping us with. His stint as our Grizzly Corps Fellow is about up. So we'll see how that evolves. We'll see what happens in Mason's world as time moves on. But I'm hopeful we might be able to keep him on for a couple more of these, but we'll see. Especially thank you, Merlin, for taking your time today, sharing this information. Really like it a lot. I think that the folks that weren't here kind of missed out, but again, we set it up to be an evergreen content on our YouTube channel. So folks that are here, if you feel like this is of value to folks who have not seen it, feel free to share it out. And then Mason, would you mind putting Merlin's contact information in the chat if you haven't already, as we wrap up?
Yeah.
And then again, yeah, next week we have a representative from the California Insurance Commissioner's Office, Duria Said. That one's going to be really good. I think we might actually get into some interesting discussion in that presentation with all that's going on in the insurance world regarding wildland fire and keeping your insurance. So that is it for us. Again, thank you guys for attending. And yeah, any last comments, Mason or Marika, or we good to go?
I did have a question I was going to ask.
Oh, of course. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, I was just attending a shadowing and assessment last week, and the homeowner expressed some concern about what seemed to be a mature redwood tree, like right between two homes. So I guess that, for our folks in West County, that may be a common occurrence. So I don't know if you want to, if there's anything you could speak to about fire risk of that.
Absolutely. So I have a mental image of two homes fairly close together and a big mature redwood tree in between with really not a lot of lower branches. I imagine that if the home burns down, the redwood tree is going to have a difficult time surviving that. I don't imagine the redwood tree causing the home to burn down, because a ground fire is going to hit the homes first. There's no fire ladder to hit the redwood tree other than the home itself. Flying embers are probably going to fall out of the tree. You don't usually have a redwood tree just light from flying embers like you would an Italian cypress or a palm tree with fronds. So with the absence of a fire ladder other than the home itself, I wouldn't be so concerned about the fire risk of a redwood tree above your home. It may shade your home. It may make it more fireproof. It may drop a lot of debris that may be flammable. So that could be a factor. But the tree itself, I wouldn't lose a lot of sleep over the fire risk of a tree in my mental image of your description.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anybody else have any last questions? We got a small enough group. I don't mind if we go a tiny bit over.
Yeah. Any follow-up?
Okay. Well, y'all, thank you for, attending, and hopefully this was of value, and please feel free to share this program on our YouTube channel with folks. So,
yeah, and don't hesitate to contact me with any tree questions. I can talk about this stuff forever.
Oh, one last thing I wanted to remind everybody, in case you didn't realize, Fire Safe Sonoma's regular board meetings, we moved to the third Monday of every month instead of the second or third Monday. And so our board meeting is coming up this Monday at 3:30. If you're interested in attending, you can find information. Let us know if you're interested in attending, and we'll connect the dots for you there. But I think everybody in here already subscribes to our updates, so you should already know. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, Martin.
We'll see you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.